Hello, and welcome to Healthy Kingston, a health promotion and wellness program of the Kingston Board of Health. I'm Janet Wade. Divorce is a major social problem in our society. There are close to 690,000 divorces that occur in the United States every year. Interestingly enough, first divorces, usually 40 to 50% of them come from first marriages, and close to 70% of second marriages end in divorce. As a result of these divorces, obviously, there are a number of children who are majorly affected because their caregivers have separated. So I've asked a local psychotherapist, who's very well known, Barbara Ward, if she would speak with us today about the different types of parenting, primarily focused on co-parenting. Co-parenting is becoming increasingly trendy. What it is when both parents decide to equally parent their children. So they don't go to a court, they don't go through custody hearings, they just decide to have equal part in raising their children together. Parallel parenting is when both parents do not wish to parent together. They want to parent, each wants to parent on their own, so that there is very little communication between the two, and one does their way of parenting and the other does their way of parenting. Co-parenting is what we're going to be talking about today with Barbara, because that is the one that's being done more consistently today. Also want to mention there are a couple of different types of co-parenting. Interestingly enough, there's what we typically think of as children go from parent to parent. So equal time with one parent, equal time with the other parent. There's also what they call bird nesting co-parenting, where the children actually stay put there in one location, say in one house, and the parents will move in. Each parent will move in separately for a certain amount of time, take care of the children, and then move out, and the other parent will go in and parent. So with starting with those definitions and that criteria, Barbara, welcome. It's very nice to have you here with us. I really appreciate it.
I always enjoy being here with you, and I always learn something from you. So I just wanted to give a little background because I'm kind of a dinosaur. I have co-parented and I have step-parented. And it was in the olden days before there were books and people writing about it. And I was married for 10 years, got divorced, remarried again 3 years later. So I have a history, and I'm going to talk to you from my own experience because you can read all the books, you can watch all the television shows. The important thing is in divorce, in co-parenting, or in step-parenting is always the same: communication and collaboration. And communication is something that's a problem in everyday life for all of us, whether we're married or divorced, within our country politically, within our world geopolitically. We don't know how to communicate, and we don't know how to collaborate. So in my history of becoming a psychotherapist, I was trained by Harville Hendrix, Dr. Harville Hendrix, who was all the big deal in the early 70s, I think 60s, 70s, and 80s. He was actually Oprah's therapist, couples therapist. And his therapy is called imago therapy, which is what I do. Imago is the Latin word for image. So what we do in our lives is we have an image of what love is like from the families that we lived in, and we take it with us. And imagotherapy is a style of therapy that reminds us that our imago can hurt us and help us. And we have to be able to distinguish what we can do to heal and what we can do to promote growth in our relationships, whether we're divorced or married or political, really. And communication, what does that mean? That means we know how to speak, we know how to listen, we know how to mirror back what we've heard. We have to learn how to validate each other and then eventually be empathic to each other's stories. So that's
Do
really
you get,
hard. It's
uh-huh.
really hard when you've stopped loving someone and want to get divorced. So what you have to do is communicate and collaborate. And you have to find a way to set boundaries that remind you that you may not love each other, but you have to continue to love your children. And
Absolutely.
all the different
Absolutely.
ways of doing it. I mean, I think it's great that they've actually kind of, made categories and everything. But most people need a third party, whether it's a therapist or some community organization. I think that nowadays, and especially Massachusetts, if you're getting divorced, you have to go to parenting classes to continue to actually file for a divorce. So I think that imago therapy is a wonderful thing when people are splitting up and splitting their families up, because as an imago therapist, we kind of picture the family or the two parents in a boat, and they each have a paddle. And as a therapist, we're standing on the shore with a megaphone saying, "Keep paddling," because usually someone just says, "Screw it, I'm just going to do it my way," and they stop
Right.
paddling.
Right.
So, an imago therapy or a third person can help you set good boundaries. And
Mhm.
good boundaries in co parenting is family meetings that respect both the parents and the children.
Mhm.
Children get lost in this because there's so much tension between the parties that are divorcing. And the worst part is that as a therapist, when people would come in, one would be so angry and hateful of the other. And I had to keep reminding them that it wasn't about them so much anymore. And that even though the kids weren't in the room with us, that we were talking about that too.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's really hard to do. And I really encourage people that are facing it now to not necessarily go and buy a book about how to do it, but maybe find someone they trust that they can help them establish the boundaries, or really get professional help too. And there's so many ways. You don't have to have money to get good counseling at this point in time.
Okay.
So
What
how
I'd like
do
to do is, if I can, is take
Sure,
a
I'm
step
sorry.
back for a minute,
Sure.
because as you mentioned, communication is such a key part to this whole the benefit of doing this correctly, co-parenting correctly. Could you go through effective communication for all of us and give an example of how to do it?
Well, first of all, you just have to acknowledge that you really want to be doing this. And it's a partner thing. Even though you're splitting up as parents, you are still partners in raising your children. All right. So you need to say, can we talk about this? When is a good time? Because most often tension starts because we start picking at each other, in the midst of everything. To just kind of actually make an appointment without a therapist or with a therapist to talk about what the needs are. And some people just don't want to do that. They just want to go back and forth bickering. But if you could say, "Could we sit down? Could I talk to you tomorrow at 2 o'clock and tell you how I'm feeling?"
Mhm.
So if someone asks you in that way, and if you are really concerned about your family, even though you're not going to be married anymore, you would have to say yes, I think. And then the person that asks for it says to the other person, tell me what you need, what you're feeling right now. And that kind of scares people. Most people don't want to say what they're feeling. So, but they do, and then they ramble on like I'm rambling on right now. But we don't let them ramble on. We just say, could you stop for a minute? This is what I heard you say. Nobody ever says that in a conversation, because if someone else is speaking, even as I'm speaking now, we're all editorializing in our head about what they're thinking about what I'm saying right now. So if you
Right.
take the time to stop and say, did you hear what I say? And then the other person repeats what they heard. And almost always it's embellished by their own prejudices and the things that they want to talk about.
Right.
So if they can acknowledge, and the other person has to know that it's acknowledged, then the person would say, this is what I heard you say, and I understand how you feel. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and then you really have to do that as the other person. What does it feel like when your former husband is so lonely and sad about not being with his children all the time? You probably can put yourself in his shoes because you're feeling the same way. And that's when we 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 validate what the person is feeling. Or we say, this is how I would feel. Is that how you're feeling? And they might say, no, I'm just mad as hell. It's not about feeling sorry. I'm just angry.
Right.
So, and then that's how you keep talking. And then you take your turn and you look at the person and say, can I speak and tell you what I'm feeling? And sometimes people don't want to and they walk away from it. That's why having professional help, or, there's always someone in everyone's family that is the go-to person to share things with. I mean, I think that most families at least have one person. So once you find out how to really talk to each other, then the important thing is to realize that you are still a family. You're just not living together. And that your children, no matter, well, it depends how young they are, that they need to have a voice too. And that in co-parenting, family meetings are absolutely the most important thing that you can do. Because if you're living in two different families and you go to your father's house and you stay up till 10 o'clock, and you go to your mother's house and you have to be in bed by 8:30, there's a problem.
Right.
And the way to work it out is if you're all together. So
Right.
families, you're still a family even if you're not married. I'm I'm I had a very contentious divorce, but it ended up that neither one of us ever spoke ill of each other. We raised two wonderful individuals. We kept a really positive relationship between the two of us, where each of us had reasons to be angry, and we never were. And if we did, we found a healthy place to be angry, not with each other, and kept our children always aware that we may not love each other in the way we used to, but we love our children even more in the way we're loving them now. So how do we
So
do?
what would you say are the advantages of doing this type of parenting?
Um, it's a way of holding your children in like a sacred vessel between you, I think, because even though you're not each other, they're still yours. And I don't
That's a
think,
beautiful way to put it. That's
yeah,
really a beautiful way to
yeah,
put it.
because people just don't feel that way. I've worked with women who just hate their ex-husbands. That poisons the well, no matter how sweet and wonderful they might be, mothering with the kids. The children pick up on those vibrations.
Mhm.
And, as my children who are now in their 60s, they have both said to me, "You never said anything negative about Dad," and I'm very lucky, never said anything negative about me. And you just have to figure out that if you really love your children and trust them, they'll figure things out on their own. You
Right.
don't have to badmouth each other, but there's a lot of bad mouthing that goes on. So just
What
to keep personal conflicts to yourself. If you have anything that you're really struggling with your ex, talk to someone else about it, not to your children. Make sure that the kids know that you and their father or mother are talking to each other and want the same things. Really having family meetings at least once a month.
uh-huh. When would this not be an effective means of co-parenting?
Well, of
What would be
course.
the disadvantage of doing this?
Well, if there's been sexual abuse, if there's been physical abuse, if there are serious mental health problems, which is probably the hardest. I mean, we recognize addiction pretty readily, and we certainly recognize physical abuse, and there's just no excuse for that. And there, you really have to get much more professional help. But some of the more subtle things, kind of things that we've been talking about recently, are the kind of the quiet mental health issues that people have that might not be apparent to everybody. And I
Mhm.
think those are special things where either professional legal people or social workers have to come in and try to help out with that. But
Right.
in all things, divorce ends a marriage. As I said, it doesn't end a family. Being flexible, which is hard for all of us, really. We have to be flexible, and we have to put sometimes our own personal hurts and, disappointments to the side, and to just continue to express love for your children and respect for your former husband or wife.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I know there was something you wanted to read.
Well, yeah, you know, again, as I said, you might not love each other, but you have to constantly affirm to your kids that you still love the children, and they need to know that you love them. And Bell Hooks, the writer, wrote, "The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom and to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others." So just
Beautifully said.
coming from that place is what's important. And I
We
thank you
need to
for,
come from love, basically.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you've
And
done a
again,
beautiful job of giving a synopsis of all of this. I know we could go on for hours, but and thank you for sharing your own personal story as well. I think this makes that all that much more powerful. Um, so major takeaways that we're the major thing is that we want to show love to our children, and we want to be civil to our spouses and do the best job that we can in co-parenting our children.
thank you for letting me speak. All right.
Oh, thank you very much. Lots of wisdom there. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dorothy McFarland, who is a Kingston resident. She is on the Preservation Committee here in town, and she is also a member of the Kingston Garden Club. Dorothy, thank you so much for being with us. Dorothy has a doctorate in biology and has worked some in the horticultural field. So she has a lot of good practical experience on raising plants. So with our dreary weather these days, I know I've been enjoying my plants inside. So I'd like to ask Dorothy, what do plants do for our mental health? Why is it advantageous to have them surrounding us?
Well, I'd like to say, watching Barbara, that was actually very difficult for me to listen to. I've never been divorced, but that was painful. And I noticed that she's surrounded by plants. And I think that's on purpose. Plants have a soothing effect just looking at them. If you can grow them just talking to them, which I do. I touch my plants a lot. I get feedback from my plants. I know there are other people who have that same feeling, and it's been proven in scientific studies that this is true. Plants can lower your blood pressure, lower your pulse. This is some recent work that's been done in Japan and England. Very good for your heart. So anything that will reduce your anger and stress, that's good for you. And it is a scientific fact. I don't have a lot of papers to tell you title, etc. Those are actually difficult to find unless you can go to a proper library online. But it's been known for a long time. And I, as an example, went through a terrible time back in the early 2000s. My mom was very ill. I spent time taking care of her and taking care of my dad, who had never had to take care of himself before. So he needed a lot of support. Then both of them died, and then I got cancer. And at the time, I was working in a greenhouse at the South Shore Natural Science Center. And that greenhouse was my savior because I could go there and just think about the plants, enjoy the planting and taking care of them, and watch the flowers as they came. And that greenhouse saved my life because that was a terrible time to go through. So, what
I know
else
you
would like
mentioned
to
in
know?
your article that you wrote that the research has also shown that there are toxins, that they help to take toxins out of the air and make the air cleaner for all of us as well. So
Mhm.
there are physical as well as mental and emotional advantages to growing
Right.
plants.
Plant leaves, they have holes in them so that they can breathe in oxygen and carbon dioxide. They also take in any gas in the room. And for some of them, the toxins especially, they actually metabolize it away. In others, they're locked in the leaf. And then when the leaf falls, if you dispose of the leaves, it's gone. I will say it takes an awful lot of plants to really clean the air, but any cleaning of all these volatiles that we have in our homes these days is helpful. And I did mention in the paper that NASA has investigated it, and I know they were trying to grow plants. I think they finally figured out a way. When you water a plant in space and there's no gravity, the water just sits on the top of the pot, which you wouldn't think about until you get there. So they had to find a way to make it go down. Yeah, I think they've
Which
solved that problem.
which leads me to, how do you keep these plants alive once you have them?
The biggest, I've talked to an awful lot of people who have trouble with plants, and there are some key things you have to do. One is to look at the plants fairly often and look for signs of disease. Look for bugs. You can see them. Dead spots on the leaves, crawling things you don't think should be there, holes in the leaves. And then you need to deal with those. In the summer, you could just, if it's a bug, you could just set it outside, and generally a lot of those bugs will be eaten. I don't personally use pesticides. I use a spray, which I'm not going to mention. I make at home, but I can't do that legally. The most problematic thing with plants is watering, and that's really the easiest thing to take care of. I would say that most people grossly underwater or grossly overwater their plants. Those are the questions I get. Those are the plants I see.
Mhm.
You have to know in the first place what kind of plant you have. Is it a succulent, the thing with plump, fleshy leaves or plump, fleshy stems? Succulents do need water, but they don't need as much as other plants. So you can water them, and I can't say, everybody wants to know how often should I water this. Depends on how dry your house is, how wet it is, how big the plant is, what kind of plant it is. So you have to estimate your needs. You stick your finger in the pot, and if it's dry, it will feel room temperature. If it's wet, it'll feel a little bit cool. For a succulent, if it's feeling a little bit cool, fine, let it go. They should really get dry before you water them again. The leafy plants, same thing. Put your finger in there. If it's a little cool, you can water, or you can wait a little bit, maybe next day. If the plant looks like it has black leaves and they're kind of slimy, or they look kind of sad, that's probably too much water. Too little water, the leaves get crispy and generally turn brown or yellow.
Okay.
But the finger method is the best thing. And I will say, for people who want more help, this is a magazine that I picked up the other day. It's a reprint, a sixth edition of houseplants from Better Homes and Gardens. And it's still on the market because it's so good. It actually, when I'm reading, it sounds like I wrote it myself. Not to pat myself on the back, but it says everything that I just said, even the finger thing. Yeah.
Terrific.
And now it should be on the out there now. I haven't looked for it lately. It is a little expensive, but it's so good.
Good. Well, hey,
Yeah.
it's cheaper than all the plants that I buy that end up dying and I have to pitch them. Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
so thank you. All good tips. Well, I feel like my mental health has been addressed. Effective communication. I need to show people that I love them, and I need to take care of my houseplants and buy even more. So anyway, very good information that's been transmitted today by you two lovely women, very intelligent, lovely women. So thank you for your time, and everyone in Kingston, stay happy this winter, buy lots of health plants, and stay healthy. Take care.